That afternoon I asked Mitchell Sanders to give me a hand. No pain, I said. Basic psychology. That's all. Mess with his head a little. Negative, Sanders said. Spook the fucker. Sanders shook his head. Man, you're sick. All I want is sick. Quietly, Sanders looked at me for a second and then walked away. I had to get Azar in on it. He didn't have Mitchell Sanders' intelligence, but he had a keener sense of justice. After I explained the plan, Azar gave me a long white smile. Tonight, he said, just don't get carried away. Me? Still smiling, Azar flicked an eyebrow and started snapping his fingers. It was a tie of his. Whenever things got intense, whenever there was a prospect for action, he'd do that snapping thing. Nobody cared for him, including myself. Understand, I said. Azar winked. Roger Dodger, only a game, right? We called the enemy ghosts. Bad night, we'd say. The ghosts are out. To get spooked in the lingo meant not only to get scared, but to get killed. Don't get spooked, we'd say. Stay cool and stay alive. Or we'd say, careful, man, don't give up the ghost. The countryside itself seemed spooky. Shadows and tunnels and incense burning in the dark. The land was haunted. We were fighting forces that did not obey the laws of the 20th century. Science. Late at night on guard, it seemed that all of Vietnam was alive and shimmering, odd shapes swaying in the paddies, boogeymen in sandals, spirits dancing in old pagodas. It was the ghost country, and Charlie Kong was the main ghost. The way he came out at night, how you never really saw him, just thought you did. Almost magical, appearing, disappearing. He could blend with the land, changing form, becoming trees and grass. He could levitate. He could fly. He could pass through barbed wire and melt away like ice and creep up on you without sound or footsteps. He was scary. In the daylight, maybe you didn't believe in this stuff. You laughed it off. You made jokes, but at night you turned into a believer. No skeptics in foxholes. Azar was wound up tight. All afternoon, while we made the preparations, he kept chanting, Halloween, Halloween. That plus the finger snapping almost made me cancel the whole operation. I went hot and cold. Mitchell Sanders would speak to me, which tended to cool it off, but then I'd start remembering things. The result was a kind of numbness. No ice, no heat. I just went through the motions rigidly by the numbers without any heart or real emotion. I rigged up my special effects, checked out the terrain, measured distances, collected the ordnance and equipment we'd need. I was professional enough about it. I didn't make mistakes, but somehow I felt as if I were gearing up to fight somebody else's war. I didn't have the patriotic zeal. If there had been a dignified way out, I might have taken it. During evening chow, in fact, I kept staring across the mess hall at Bobby Jorgensen, and when he finally looked up at me, almost nodding, I came very close to calling it quits. Maybe I was fishing for something. One last apology, something public. But Jorgensen only gazed back at me. It was a strange gaze, too, straight and unafraid, as if apologies were no longer required. He was sitting there with Dave Jensen and Mitchell Sanders and a few others, and he seemed to fit in very nicely, all smiles and group rapport. That's probably what clinched it. I went back to my hooch, showered, shaved, threw my helmet against the wall, lay down for a while, got up, prowled around, talked to myself, applied some fresh ointment, then headed off to find Azar. Just before dusk, Alpha Company stood for roll call. Afterward, the men separated into two groups. Some went off to write letters or party or sleep. The others trooped down to the base perimeter where, for the next 11 hours, they would pull night guard duty. It was SOP, one night on, one night off. This was Jorgensen's night on. I knew that in advance, of course. And I knew his bunker assignment. Bunker 6, a pile of sandbags at the southwest corner of the perimeter. That morning I'd scouted out every inch of his position. I knew the blind spots and the little ripples of land and the places where he'd take cover in case of trouble. But still, just to guard against few freak screw-ups, Azar and I tailed him down to the wire. We watched him lay out his poncho and connect his claymores to their firing devices. Softly, like a little boy, he was whistling to himself. He tested his radio, unwrapped a candy bar, then sat back with his rifle cradled to his chest like a teddy bear. A pigeon, Azar whispered. Roast pigeon on a spit. I smell it sizzling. Except this isn't for real. Azar shrugged. After a second, he reached out and clapped me on the shoulder. Not roughly, but not gently either. What's real, he said. 8 months in Fantasyland, it tends to blur the line. Honest to God, I sometimes can't remember what real is. Psychology, that was one thing I knew. You don't try to scare people in broad daylight. You wait. because the darkness squeezes you inside yourself. You get cut off from the outside world. The imagination takes over. That's basic psychology. I pull enough night guard to know how the fear factor gets multiplied as you sit there hour after hour, nobody to talk to, nothing to do but stare into the big black hole at the center of your own sorry soul. The hours go by and you lose your gyroscope. Your mind starts to roam. You think about dark closets, madmen, murderers, under the bed, all those childhood fears, gremlins and trolls and giants. You try to block it out, but you can't. You see ghosts. You blink and shake your head. Bullshit, you tell yourself. But then you remember the guys who died. Kurt Lemon, Kiowa, Ted Lavender, and half dozen others whose faces you can't bring into focus anymore. And then pretty soon you start to ponder the stories you've heard about Charlie's magic. This time some guys cornered 2VC in a dead-end tunnel. No way out, but how when the tunnel was fragged and searched, something was found except a pile of dead rats. 100 stories. Ghosts wiping out a whole marine platoon in 20 seconds flat. Ghosts rising from the dead. Ghosts behind you and in front of you and inside you. After a while, as the night deepens, you feel a funny buzzing in your ears. Tiny sounds get heightened and distorted. The crickets talk in code. The night takes on a weird electronic tingle. You hold your breath. You coil up and tighten your muscles and listen, knuckles hard, the balls ticking in your head. You hear the spooks laughing. No shit laughing. You jerk up. You freeze. You squint at the dark. Nothing, though. You put your weapon on full automatic. You crouch lower and count your grenades and make sure the pins are bent for quick throwing and take a deep breath and listen and try not to freak. And then later, after enough time passes, things start to get bad. Come on, Azar said, let's do it. But I told him to be patient. Waiting was the trick. So we went to the movies, Barabella, again, the 8th straight night. A lousy movie, I thought, but it kept Azar occupied. He was crazy about Jane Fonda. Sweetie Jane, he kept saying. Sweet Janie boosts a man's moral. Then with his hand, he showed me which part of his moral got boosted. It was an old joke. Everything was old. The movie, the heat, the booze, the water. The war. I fell asleep during the second reel, a hot, angry sleep, and 4 minutes later I woke up to a sore ass and a foul temper. It wasn't yet midnight. We hiked over to the EM Club and worked our way through a six-pack. Mitchell Sanders was there at another table, but he pretended not to see me. Around closing time, I nodded at Azar. Goody, Gumdrop, he said. We went over to my hooch, picked up our gear, and then moved through the night down to the wire. I felt like a soldier again, back in the bush, it seemed. We observed a good field discipline, not talking, keeping to the shadows and joining in with the darkness. When we came up on Bunker 6, Azar lifted his thumb and peeled away from me and began circling to the south. Old times, I thought, a kind of thrill, a kind of dread. Quietly I shouldered my gear and crossed over to a heap of boulders that overlooked Jorgensen's position. I was directly behind him, 32 meters away exactly. Even in the heavy darkness, no moon yet, I could make out the kid's silhouette. A helmet, a pair of shoulders, a rifle barrel, his back was to me. He gazed out at the wire and the paddies beyond, where the danger was. I knelt down and took out 10 flares and unscrewed the caps and lined them up in front of me and then checked my wristwatch. Still 5 minutes to go. Edging over to my left, I groped for the ropes I'd set up that afternoon. I found them, tested the tension, and checked the time again. 4 minutes. There was a light feeling in my head, fluttery and taut at the same time. I remember it from the boonies, giddiness and doubt and awe. All those things and a million more. You wonder if you're dreaming. It's like you're in a movie. There's a camera on you. So you begin acting. You're somebody else. You think of all the films you've seen, Audie Murphy and Gary Cooper and the Cisco Kid, all those heroes, and you can't help falling back on them as models of a proper comportment. On ambush, curled in the dark, you rearrange your posture, you try for your grin, you measure out your breathing, eyes open, be alert, old imperatives, old movies. It's all swirls together. Cliches mixing with your own emotions, and in the end, you can't tell one from the other. There was that coldness inside me. I wasn't myself. I felt hollow and dangerous.